There is a law that is an absolute law when using R. You are going to make mistakes. You already know this. Let's talk about some common mistakes when we write using R, and by doing so, we may pay more attention to the potential for these mistakes and therefore help avoid them. Typos. That's one of the most common mistakes. Thinking you wrote a particular object name when you made a typo. Inconsistent case. You know by now that R is case sensitive. A lower letter is different than an uppercase letter in R. And if you're inconsistent with this, then two objects that you believe have the same name could have different names. Forgetting commas. When you're creating a vector, you need to separate the items. When you're using a function, you need to separate the arguments. Forgetting quotes. If your intent is to create a string, but you forget the quotes, R will think your intent is to name an object. Not using the concatenate function. This is a trap I continue to fall into, even as long as I've been using R. I'll try to create a vector, especially if it's creating a vector within a function argument, and I'll simply list out the items in the vector rather than concatenating them. The number of open and closed parentheses don't match. You always have to close a parentheses to accompany an open parentheses in order to complete the task within the parentheses. Feeding a function the wrong type of data. Every function expects to have arguments of certain types of data, certain types of objects. If you're giving them the wrong type of object, then you can get error messages. At best, at worst, it will take it but not do what you intend. Using functions that aren't available in base R because you forgot to load a package. Now let's look at the kinds of error messages that you can get in R. Unfortunately, the error messages aren't as helpful as you would like, so let's interpret some of them. There are more error messages than the ones I'm going to show, but here are some of the most common ones and what you might want to start looking for when you see these messages. Object, and it gives the name of the object, not found. This could be because you misspelled the name of the object. It could be because you used the wrong case, or because you're running the line in which you're calling on that object prior to running the line when you defined the object. Could not find function and gives the name of the function. You could have misspelled the function name. You could have used the wrong case with the function name. You forgot to load the package that contains the function, or you put parentheses after a non-function name, leading R to believe that you're calling a function when you're using another kind of object that is not a function. Unexpected, and then a close parentheses, in. That just means you don't have an equal number of open and closed parentheses. You better check to make sure that they're matching and they're matching in the right place. Having the right number of parentheses but having them in the wrong places when you're nesting functions, that can create a lot of problems that are tough to find. Unexpected symbol in. You forgot a punctuation mark, such as a comma. A plus sign. The previous statement's not finished, so R is expecting you to add more. If you think that you finished the previous statement and you're getting a plus sign, that means you have an error, that you didn't somehow complete that statement because the plus sign is R's prompt for, all right, tell me what comes next. A few simple things we can do to avoid mistakes when writing scripts. First one is obvious. Be careful. One thing about talking to a computer is that you have to say precisely what you mean. So think about your words before you use them. Use a style guide that includes a style for the names of objects. That will keep your case consistent as well as whether you're using, for example, a period or an underscore in order to separate words. By adhering to a style guide in terms of spacing, it will also make your code more readable, which makes it far easier to find errors. Copy and paste long variable and function names. If you're going to use them over and over, every time you type them, it's going to lead to the potential for mistakes. If you copy and paste, that won't happen. This is an important one. Run one line or just a few lines to isolate errors. Don't try to find an error in the entire script when you get an error message. Go back to the beginning and start running line by line. Try to determine what it is specifically that's causing that error message. Copy from working code. If you already have a script that works, if you can use it as a function and source it in, that's all the better. That's another good reason to use functions, because you know that you've got them working. They won't add errors. But even if you're not going to use it as a function, cut and paste and then rename the variables to make sense and adjust to your style guide. That is, you can even copy code that you know is working from others and then make it your own by adjusting it to your particular style guide. Check documentation for functions. Make sure you have the arguments in the right order. You might also want to name the arguments, and so that you know which argument is doing what. Make sure you're using the right kind of objects that the function calls for in its arguments. Read vignettes. Vignettes provide examples of how to use code, and if you find a vignette is doing it very differently than the way you did it, then you're onto something, and it's the first step into correcting your code.